Public art is meant to inspire and evoke pride. But have you ever wondered, how did this get here? Nowadays, with modern technology, it's easy to forget that thousands and even hundreds of years ago, there were literal roadblocks to making public art public. Lack of roads was one thing, but did you ever consider pirates? Our guest today has written a book all about the Renaissance art trade, and today we're paying the freight on Across the Fence. Good afternoon, and thanks for stopping by Across the Fence. I'm Keith Silva. When we think of an artist, we tend to focus on the creative act itself, the struggle to bring forth the vision. We don't think about the networks of individuals involved in commissioning contracts or materials acquisition that preceded the work, or the labor-intensive logistics involved with transporting a piece to its final destination. But when you dig into those details, a fuller picture of the work and the world in which it was created emerges, putting the history in art history. My guest today is all about those details. Kelley Helmstutler is a professor of art history at UVM who studies Italian and Spanish sculpture of the Renaissance and Baroque periods and is the executive director of UVM's School of Arts. Her new book is called Shipping Sculptures from Early Modern Italy, The Mechanics, Costs, Risks, and Rewards, and it is fascinating. Kelley, thank you so much for coming back on Across the Fence.
Thanks for having me.
We're very glad for you to be here. Set the stage for us. What's the period that the book looks into?
So I am a specialist of later Renaissance and early Baroque sculpture, so that runs from about 1550 to 1750.
Okay. Europe, right?
Yes.
All Europe. What is the role of religion at this time?
Religion has an incredibly powerful role, and it intermingles heavily with politics. So especially in the case of the Spanish court, which is where I do a lot of my research, I mostly work on the Southern European sector. So Italy and Spain, very Catholic countries, especially during this time. Religion is primary. The King of Spain calls himself the most Catholic king, for example. So it's right up at the top of priorities for them.
Well, as someone who went to parochial Catholic school for most of his schooling, I relate, I understand. Yeah. Italy's the same thing, right?
Yeah, it really is.
Equally powerful. Who's in charge? You said the most Catholic king. Yeah. Who's in charge in Italy?
So mostly the King of Spain. So Spain ruled over most of northern Italy and all of southern Italy. So there's just kind of a strip in the middle that is either ruled by the Pope in the Papal States or by other princes across Italy, including the very famous Medici family that were ruling over Florence and larger Tuscany in this period.
And so are you saying that the King of Spain had more influence in Italy than the Pope at this time?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right.
The king is often negotiating. The king is often negotiating with the Pope on power issues, but also on how they're interpreting, the Catholic faith in this point. So, it's a little more balanced than one might imagine.
Okay. What's the role of art at this time?
Yeah. So art serves a religious purpose, absolutely, in Catholic churches in particular. You need art for altarpieces, for reliquaries, for just the parts of the devotion and liturgy that happen in the Catholic Mass. So those are very important. Tombs and tomb sculptures are also an important part of church architecture in this period. But there's also an important diplomatic role of art in this period. So princes like the Medici family, but any rulers are trying to use art as a means to create relationships and gain favors from other courts across Europe. So art has a very important diplomatic purpose.
So I guess what I'm hearing you say is that it's less of the King of Spain was not commissioning statues of himself for political reasons to remind the people who was in charge, but were they commissioning, altarpieces for churches? Is that what we're talking about?
They're doing all of those things. They
things.
certainly are commissioning sculptures for their own purposes, both political and religious, and personal. They have massive art collections that decorate their palaces, as do all the members of their court. But the role of diplomacy is, as I talk about in my book, is more about, Italy and especially the Medici family, which I've focused on, are sending sculptures to Spain because they are so reliant on the king's favor for economic and political reasons that they use these gifts as a way to curry favor with the king. So, it's art of all different kinds of subject matters. It could be portraits of the king, religious, things for churches, or things for public spaces in Spain.
Gotcha. Everything's marble?
No.
No?
No.
What
no,
kind of
certainly
materials?
Not. Marble is certainly valuable and important in this period, but bronze is the most expensive and most valuable, in other senses, to receive. And as I talked about in the book, one of the most important benefits of bronze is that it doesn't break when you're shipping it. It is much less fragile. Marble comes with all kinds of problems with it.
Is this a little chicken and the egg kind of thing? Like if you bronze, we know we can ship that anywhere. Yeah. It can be whatever. And so marble becomes even more valued, perhaps?
So marble is expensive in the shipping part of it. It costs way, way more to ship marble pieces than it does bronze pieces, precisely because of the fragility and sometimes because of the issues of weight with marble as opposed to bronze, depending on the casting process. Gotcha. So bronze is an extremely expensive material to make, but it's much less costly to ship. Bronze equestrian monuments, for example, are really the most important gift that you can send and receive. Bronze is usually the material that is used because there's a whole tradition that goes back to ancient Rome where bronze is used for equestrian monuments. So sometimes there's more of a significance to the material than just, a flash of money.
I think your 30th wedding anniversary is bronze equestrian monuments.
Exactly, that's right, as it should be. That's right.
For someone who isn't an expert, is there a sculptor at this time who the average person would know, or who's the big sculptor at this time?
So, everybody knows Michelangelo,
okay, sure.
And certainly works by Michelangelo are highly prized across Europe, even, certainly during his lifetime and after his death as well. So that continues, but, it's hard to get yourself a Michelangelo. So other sculptors certainly become very prominent in this period. One of the most important is John Bologna, who was working in Florence but came from Brussels. So he traveled to where the money was, and he knew he could find good patrons with the Medici family in Florence, and he makes tons of sculptures that are sent all over Europe, but especially to Spain.
So if you can't get yourself a Michelangelo, maybe a couple of Bolognas.
Get you a John Bologna, absolutely.
And the sculptor was sort of his own business, right? So talk about what that sort of cottage industry doesn't feel the right word, but what's the whole industry around the sculptor?
They are extraordinarily entrepreneurial. So not only do they work hard to sort of advertise themselves to get commissions for sculptures, but they are having to run these large workshops with an enormous labor force inside of the workshop to get these pieces out in a timely way, because patrons usually in the contracts will stipulate how much time they have to finish something. But sometimes sculptors, and this I talk about a great deal in the book, are having to figure out the mechanics of packaging appropriately the materials, finding the guys that can come and make a custom box for it and seal the box with wax so it can be waterproof, lest it go overboard if it's going by sea, or appropriately package it with rags and hay and other materials so that it's cushioned if it's traveling overland. So they're having to think about much more of the practical issues involved than we might have believed.
Right.
And often the way that they're designing the sculptures is directly related to the ways in which they're going to have to travel after that. So they're having to make some stylistic decisions about whether to have arms extended out or not, because if it's marble and you have limbs extending, that just makes it all the more fragile and much more expensive to ship. So they're having to do the calculus on all of this about, how to get it there safely and intact as cheaply as possible, to try to minimize costs, because sometimes the sculptor is contracted for the cost included in the shipping, at least to some degree. But there's also the growth in this period of an insurance industry, where, you know, patrons, when they are commissioning sculptures that are going to be sent overseas, will buy shipping insurance to cover any breakage or cost. And sometimes it includes a clause where the sculptor has to redo the sculpture if it's lost en route. So, you know, even looking at sort of the what may seem to normal people as really a boring part of the sculpture production, to me is really fascinating, just to see the birth of these industries that are not just for sculpture by any means, but show us the ways in which export and import is happening all over the world more and more in the 17th century.
Gives you a much better sense, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on and talk to you. It gives you this much better sense that this idea we have of artists, of somebody dreamily, you know, Michelangelo, you know, trying to summon the angel out of the marble, he was really trying to find a good hay and box guy as well.
He was also doing that, without a doubt. And you know, I think I'm certainly not the first scholar to dive in more deeply to think about the artist's workshop and the different things artists were responsible for, in reality, kind of breaking down that aura of the artist. But Michelangelo is a great example, because we often think about him working in isolation in his studio, and that's a complete falsity. You know, it's completely wrong. He had a huge team, and he kept really great records of the team that worked with him and how much they were paid. So we have evidence straight from the master about how complicated these things were.
Got a couple of minutes left. I don't want to skip the discussion about pirates, because pirates, okay, so I've got my beautiful equestrian bronze and I've got to get it over the water somewhere. What happens when it leaves the studio?
So, you know, when it's all packed up and ready to go and has been weighed, there's, to me, a really fascinating part of this is that there's a gig economy that develops across Europe as goods are being moved long distances. So you'll have the guy that's a farmer by day, but then makes extra money on the side by renting out his oxen to pull the carts that are holding sculptures or other goods. Not only do you have to worry about storms, which could cause sculptures to go overboard, and they certainly did, but you do have to worry about pirates, and there were very active pirates, both English and from Ottoman Turks, that are pirating out there. And it's not that they particularly care about sculpture, but they recognize the political significance of sculpture, and so they will rob the ships of these things, throw them overboard, or go and use them elsewhere as a sign of, you know, triumph and disrespect thrown at that, the person that they took it from.
Kelley, I could keep talking to you all morning. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. My thanks to the crew behind the scenes here, who's always willing to pick up and put down what we're creating here on the set. I'm Keith Silva. This is Across the Fence. Thanks for being part of our family.